Good afternoon. We are here today to celebrate, remember, and grieve Peter Grundfossen. If you didn't know, Peter was quite a poetic soul, and he loved Leonard Cohen, something he and I had in common. That song, Anthem, was one of his favorites, the song that David played. Now, if you don't know that song by heart, like I, and I'm assuming Peter did, the chorus, the words of the chorus are, "Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Peter lived a remarkably dynamic life. Very many acts, very many people he knew and loved, very many relationships. And you will hear much more about that from his beloved wife, Cathryn, a little later on. I wanted to talk just a little bit, though, about my experience of Peter and just his remarkably kind energy. I felt like light radiated from Peter. When I hear that song and think of him, that's what I think of. I feel like if he was cracked, it wasn't that the light was getting in, the light was actually coming out and filling me up. Last year, he would come to services when he could make it, and he would sit right back there. And there's a part in the service where Reverend Monica and I go out and shake everybody's hand. And when I got to him, suddenly, and this happened the first time I ever saw him, and it happened every time. You know, I'm sitting, I'm kind of being awkward, talking to everybody, shaking hands, and then I get to Peter, and he just beams at me. And he says, "I'm so glad you're here." And I just hugged him. It was just what came out of me around him. And that happened every time. And if you knew Peter, I assume you know what I'm talking about. When I visited him in his final days, I sat with Cathryn, we read him Leonard Cohen poems. And then I got close to him to speak to him, and he opened his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "I'm so glad you're here." When somebody full of so much life and light passes on from our world, it can feel like we're suddenly in darkness. But just as we light our chalice today, we know that light, all energy, flows on and on. It changes forms, but it never leaves. And if you experienced Peter, his light now lives in you. Through whatever cracks you may have, the light has gotten in. And as we light our chalice this morning, I feel that I can speak for Peter. If Peter were here right now, he would say, "I'm so glad you are all here." A poem by Rosemerry, Wahtola, Trommer. Grace. Though the world is dented and dinged and scuffed and scorned, we trim the beans and peel the potatoes. And the kitchen is warm and full of laughter. We hum as we work and break into scraps of song. All day our hands are joyful as they prepare the meal to come. Even now there are wars and battles, not all of them fought with guns, some waged intimately in our thoughts, our scraped up hearts. And still this scent of apple pie sweetening as it bakes, this inner insistence that love is not only possible, it is every bit as real as our fear. Whether the host has brought out his best wine, his crystal glasses, or water in chipped clay cups, there is every reason to be generous. To serve not only our family, our friends, ourselves, but also those we don't yet know how to love, and those parts of ourselves we have tried to keep separate. Tonight, the host has hidden bait in the dinner. We are all caught. Scent of sage, scent of mushrooms and cream, the bite of cranberry. Never mind the potatoes cooked too long. Blessings seep into all the imperfect places. Even if you can't name the blessings, consider them secret ingredients. The point is not to understand the feast, but to eat it together. The words of Rosemerry, Wahtola, Trommer. My friends, please rise in body or spirit for hymn number 159 in the gray hymnal. This is my song.
Good afternoon. I first Met Peter Grundfossen when I was a student at the University of Utah back in the late 1960s and early 70s. I was a first-generation college student, came from Ogden to the big city in Salt Lake. I knew not a single person, and to say I was unprepared for college was a gross understatement. After about the first quarter, I was really struggling. I was assigned a roommate in the dormitories. We didn't get along. He was more interested in partying and playing his loud music late at night and having friends over than studying. I found out the classes were much more difficult than in high school. And I hadn't made any new friends. I was homesick. I was worried about financial situations, even though I had loans that would pay for my tuition and books, and living in the dormitories, nothing else. And you always needed, at that time of your life, a few incidentals. So in any event, I was quite depressed, and I had sort of made that decision that I was going to drop out of school and go back to Ogden. And then Pete Grundfossen entered my life. And I'll never forget, I was sitting on a chair in the Union Building, and this tall, handsome, cool-looking dude with a goatee came up, sat down beside me, and says, "Hi, I'm Pete Grundfossen. Are you a student here?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, I must have had a forlorn look on my face, because he said, "You look unhappy. Are you okay?" Well, that opened up the floodgates, and I just gushed out all of the problems, concerns I was having, and then told him that I was planning on dropping out, and I was there in the Union Building writing some notes to explain to my mother, who only had a high school degree and always envisioned one of her children going on to college, and what was I going to tell her. So, as you might expect from a dean of students, he was empathetic and said, try to console me, and said, things will work out. This is not atypical for first time being away from home in a whole new environment and what have you. Things will work out. But not only did he do that, he also said, he took it a step further. He says, I think I might be able to help you out. So this was like on a Monday. He said, here's my office in the Union Building. Meet me on Wednesday. Don't make any final decisions yet until we get together. So Wednesday came, I came and met with him. In fact, he said, I've spoken to the director of housing. We're going to move you to a new roommate. By the way, I've got a tutor lined up for you. I found out later that he paid for that tutor. It wasn't something that the university provided. And he said, I think what you need is you need to find some new friends and some new activities outside of the classroom. He says, not all learning takes place in the classroom. And so he introduced me to the student body president, said, let's find a way to get this young man involved in student government. Well, one thing led to another, and 2 years later, I was elected as student body president. And I often think how my life had been different had that Pete Grundfossen not stopped by and introduced himself at that time. And over the years, Peter became a close friend and my confidant, and he ended up mentoring me in sort of all aspects of life. We regularly went to lunch at the Huddle. For those of you who are U grads and are old enough, you'll remember about the Huddle was the kind of the gathering place for students. He got me a job as a student manager at the Union Building. He knew I was under some financial stress and had not yet been able to find a part-time job, so he got me that job. The Union Building was open from 7 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night during the weekdays, and stayed open till midnight on the weekends. And student managers ran the building between 5 and closing time. And there were 5 of us, and we rotated what days we worked. And at least a couple times a month, Peter would swing by, usually around 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, just to say hi to me, and we'd go have coffee at the huddle. So we discussed my career plans. Ironically, he's the one who convinced me to go to law school. He wrote a very compelling letter. I wasn't the best student academically, and I got admitted to law school. Ironically, he, of course, ended up getting his law degree, but I got mine first. He didn't start law school until he was 40 years of age. So I didn't realize this at the time, but Peter essentially had become the father that I never had. I was born in California. My mother and father divorced when I was 3. She moved to Ogden and never remarried until after I was in college. Peter took a personal interest in me more than just an interest of a student by a dean of students. He gave me life advice like a father would do to their son. He said, don't be afraid to fail. Admit your mistakes and learn from them. And then finally he said, don't take yourself too seriously or material things. Let me just give you one little story that illustrates that last part about don't taking material things too seriously. Peter had this cool little silver Fiat sports car that was a convertible. And he loved that car. I loved the car. He drove me around. We didn't have tracks back then, so whenever I had to go downtown for something, Peter would usually drive me. And on the weekends, we'd take rides up the Cottonwood Canyons. One day, I think when he was visiting me while I was on my student union business duties, he said, I'm going to be going to a conference back east. I'll be there for about a week, and I'm going to spend a few extra days touring one of the national parks. So we've gone about 10 days. Would you like to use my car while I'm gone? Who does that? What administrator today would trust their car to, I think I was 20 by then, but, and so of course I said yes. I loved it. And I had the time of my life driving that little flashy sports car around for 10 days. My dating life improved immensely during those 10 days. But I even drove it to Wendover a couple times. I didn't tell Peter that until months later. But it was a great time and just illustrated what a wonderful guy he was. And to further highlight his advice, don't get too tied to material things, is I was going to pick him up at the airport, and I discovered there was a scratch on the driver's side door. And I knew it hadn't been there when Peter loaned me the car. I was really nervous. How am I going to explain this to him? So I pick him up at the airport, profusely thank him for letting me use the car, and said, but Peter, I've got some bad news. There's a scratch on the driver's side door. I'm so sorry. And he walked around and looked at it. He put out his head. He says, hand me the keys. I handed him the keys. He walked around the back of the car to the passenger side, took his key, put a scrape in the door. He said, oh, look, matching doors. No big deal. So that was the Pete Grundfossen who had a huge impact on my life, and the life learnings I got from him carried with me throughout the entire life. And I know I'm almost out of time, but I just want to briefly mention the significant role that Peter played during the anti-war protests at the University of Utah, and how he was a major reason why, although there were demonstrations and activists, and we had a sit-in, which I'll talk about in a moment, there was no violence at the university, and in large part that was because of Peter. But those times were very tumultuous, and there were over 100 campuses that ended up being shut down, and a lot accompanied with violence. Of course, we all will remember the 4 students at Kent State who were killed when the National Guard opened fire on a otherwise peaceful demonstration. In any event, there were a whole bunch of instances where Peter was a calming influence, but let me just relate one briefly. 4 days after the Kent State shootings, there was a sit-in at the Park building at the university. And there were about 200 students who physically occupied the building, sat on the floors, shoulder to shoulder throughout the main foyer and the hallway going down to the president's office. And they were vowed to not leave until the president, who was Jim Fletcher at the time, former director of Nassau, came out and talked with them. And of course, their demand was to do what a lot of other universities had done and called a strike and canceled classes. So the students were there. They were there the entire day. And then 5 o'clock or 5:30 came around and time for the buildings to close. And the provost came out and said, if you refuse to leave, you will be arrested and charged with trespass. And this was the flashpoint where in a lot of other universities, riot-clad police coming in to physically arrest students ended up in violence. Well, Peter, who was very well respected by students, both the students who were supporting a protest and a strike, as well as the students who were not, he was very well respected. He asked, convinced the administration not to have the Salt Lake City police come up and arrest the students. And let's let the campus police, there were only 2 or 3 at the time, who were in plain clothes, didn't carry guns, let them arrest the students. And they said, well, that'll never happen. The students will resist and whatever. So Peter went around, talked with all the students, many of whom he knew, and said, look, I'm empathetic to your concerns. You will be arrested if you do not leave, but there's an easy way and a bad way to do this. And I've convinced that if you will not resist and allow yourself to be, they all were going to go limp, be carried out, then we will not have to have the police come and physically arrest you. And if you resist, then you'll be charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice, which is a much more serious crime. Well, to make a long story short, Peter went and talked with all of them and came back, convinced the university that they could remove the students in a more gentle way. He then gave me, I was the student body president at the time, he then gave me this bullhorn. By then there had been, several thousands of people had gathered outside of the Park building waiting for this big confrontation that was going to happen. And he gave me this bullhorn. He says, Randy, you're the student body president. Go out there, explain what's going to happen to these students, or to the people outside. And then we've got this agreed upon way that's going to be kind of a gentle removal. And so I ended up standing on the top of the van, the paddy wagon, I guess, where the police came up and one by one, 2 plainclothes officers came and lifted up someone who went limp and carried them into the van. And they could hold about 20, then they were taken down to Salt Lake to be booked. And it took about 2 hours to do that. But it was peaceful and avoided some violence. And I ended up standing on the van with this bullhorn that Peter had given me, explained the process. And then as each student was arrested and put into the van, I called out their name, their major, and what year they were. I'm sure it's a FERPA violation, but in any event, and everybody cheered, and it just diffused the whole situation. So that's just a clear example of how Peter had built up trust with students, had built up trust with the administrators, and was able to diffuse a potentially volatile situation. There are other, in the interest of time, I won't explain the others. Afterwards, I'm happy to share some more stories about how Peter really was instrumental in preventing violence on the University of Utah campus. He and I sort of physically lost touch with one another when he moved to Oregon. In fact, I had not even moved, was aware that he had moved back to Salt Lake until Cathryn invited me to his 80th birthday party. And I am blessed that a few weeks before he passed, I had the opportunity to personally have lunch with him, just the two of us. I came and picked him up, and we reminisced about our university days. And I'm forever grateful, Cathryn, for you offering me that opportunity.
Hi there, I'm Peter Netka, and I want to thank you all for coming out here to honor Peter Grundfossen. Peter was a great friend of mine, and as you'll learn, we spent a lot of time together. He was so friendly that meeting him was sort of like greeting an old friend. I had been out on a bicycle ride, and Peter had been out on a bicycle ride, and we ended up standing next to each other at Einstein's Bagel Bakery on 39th South and Wasatch Boulevard. And Peter quickly told me that he and his friend had just completed a marvelous bicycle ride down the Oregon coast. And if you've ever been on that road, you'll know it's windy, it's twisty, it's hilly, and it's kind of dangerous because there's a lot of cars on it. And I was astounded by that. That took me way back. But then I promptly told him that I had just completed a solo ride from Salt Lake City to Yellowstone. And he was suitably impressed by that and invited me to the table where he and his friend were having a bagel, and I went. And that was the beginning of a very long, intensive friendship, deep friendship, that's lasted 20 years. And when I say intense, imagine this. Imagine spending an hour and a half with somebody a day riding a bicycle around town with nothing to do except talk. And we did this for 200 days a year for 12 years. That's intense. When you do that, you learn just about everything there is to know except the color of their underwear, everything. And that's what happened. But we both came from very different environments. I was a salesman in a corporate environment. And of course, he, as you know, came from education and government. But that didn't change anything. We were completely equals on the bike. And we talked about everything. And you can imagine that many hours side by side, riding around this town and this area. I learned all about Peter Grundfossen, and he learned all there was about me. And the one thing that I really found out, the secret of Peter was he loved to laugh. He just dearly loved to laugh. And right underneath that, he loved to have fun. Even though he was pretty serious, and he could be beautiful in speaking and arousing people, he did love to have fun. So when Cathryn asked me to speak about all the ways that Peter had influenced me, I thought about it for a minute and realized I'd have to be up here an hour. So then I changed it and decided to just tell you about all the fun we had, because we did have fun. Our bicycling started out as just bicycling exercise, but the more we rode, the further we rode. And I'm telling you, we rode from Ogden to Draper, from Saltair to the canyons. We rode everywhere, and we did it side by side. And we were later joined by a man who will be speaking soon here, Bob Lindsley. You all know him. But we not only took these day rides, which were a lot of fun, and we saw each other all the time, but then we started taking some long rides. We rode with some guys up to Lava Hot Springs and back. We got to stay in some of the beautiful towns like Malad City, Idaho. Yes, indeed, and other places. But this riding was very helpful for us, and we spurred each other along. Get up one morning and say, I don't want to go for a ride. But there was Peter knocking on the door saying, let's go, let's go. So we did. And their friendship just kept getting deeper and deeper. And pretty soon, it wasn't just the daytime rides, it was dinner. And about twice a month, we were having dinner. And as life went on and bicycling finally slowed down, it became a different kind of friendship. Bob Lindsley and I would meet with Peter every Wednesday for breakfast. And we never missed a Utah football game at the bar, cheering the team on. So it was a very favorite thing for him to do. So, but back to the riding, another long ride, in fact, maybe the most famous ride we ever took, was Peter and I together rode from the Arizona border to the Idaho border. And we did that in 7 days at 405 miles, and it was really an accomplishment. But what nobody knows is the year before, we tried to do it the other direction and got down to Nephi and got rained out. No one ever mentions that one. But in any case, I'm just proud to be here to tell you about fun with Peter Grundfossen, because most of the things that we did together, whether it was dinner, bicycling, U games, or whatever, was fun. Peter was a great friend of mine.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Douglas Peter Grundfossen, and I like that name a lot. You can call me Doug, though. Adventure comes in many forms. For my dad, Peter Daniel Grundfossen, adventure should have been his middle name. For my dad, life was always an adventure, whether it was biking, handball, kayaking, walking, running, camping, hiking, mountain climbing, whatever. He loved sports too. Boy, did he love sports. Baseball, basketball, football. I think his true love was definitely basketball. He loved the Utah Jazz, something fierce. Big rivalry with my brother, who was a Portland Trail Blazers fan. And at the time when Seattle had a team, I'm a Seattle Supersonics fan. And so there was a rivalry among us that was pretty great. In 1987, the three of us got to go to the NBA All-Star game in the old Kingdom. That was very cool. My dad and I, on occasion, got to go to Mariner games every summer or spring. He would come up and visit me, and I'd take him to the stadium, and we'd watch some baseball. He loved that. We had a really awesome rivalry in college football, with him being a University of Utah Ute and me being a staunch fan of the University of Washington Huskies. I would often come to Salt Lake City and watch the Huskies play the Utes at Rice Eccles, or he'd come up to Seattle and watch the Utes play the Huskies in Husky Stadium. So this was really fun for us. My dad loved adventure in many forms, and oftentimes, well, not often, but occasionally, there were some accidents and some severe injuries along the way, but nothing really dead or dead. I remember he broke his leg in 6 places playing handball. Yeah, that ended the handball career. Late in life, he fell off his bicycle and injured himself really bad. And he recovered from that and got back on the bike, which was amazing. He was over 80 years old when it happened. So just an amazing thing. And then a remarkable incident when he's sea kayaking with my brother on the Oregon coast out of the mouth of the Nehalem River. They got dumped into the ocean. Thanks to my brother's heroic efforts, he saved my dad's life that day. Really nothing in the way of an injury other than some hypothermia. When I graduated from high school in 1977, Dad had planned this great adventure where we're going to go to Europe and bicycle through 7 countries to get to our ancestral village in Sweden, where my grandfather, Grandpa Swede, was born in Grundfossen, Sweden. And so we made our trek. Just so happened the locals told us that summer was the rainiest summer in 100 years in Europe. We still managed to, by train and by bike, go through Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg on bike. And it was really quite an adventure. My dad would notice some of my mannerisms along the way. I was an 18-year-old at the time. And it rained a lot, and we were in our tents a lot, and we were cooking rice as part of our meals on a little gas stove that he had brought. And I remember one morning, right after breakfast, in the tent, he was asking me if I was going to change my napkins that day. Well, I gave him that quizzical look, and I had to say, "What are you talking about?" And he said he noticed how I was constantly wiping my dirty, wet hands on my pants, which he nicknamed my napkins. My dad loved nature, and he loved the mountains. He loved the Uintas. I got to go on a great 7-day backpacking trip with him in the high Uintas. That was awesome. But he loved the Wasatch. He loved the Ochres. He loved the Henrys. He really had an extraordinary love of the Cascades. Hang on just a moment while I get a drink of water here. Thank you. He loved the Cascades. He loved Mount Hood and Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, Mount Baker. He told me that when he was young with his buddies, he had climbed Mount Hood. Well, with me, we climbed Mount St. Helens twice. Up on the crater rim, Dad always beat me to the top. Up on the crater rim, I remember Dad doing this bit, sticking a foot out over the edge. And this trait of his over the years kind of gave me the willies. It's like, would you stop doing that, please? He tried to climb Mount Adams with me too once with another friend of mine, and unfortunately he had to turn back with a stomach ailment. Ate too many shrimp the night before. But we had hiked all kinds of trails up in the Snoqualmie Pass and up on Mount Rainier, and we loved to visit Mount Baker. They would come up to Bellingham in the summer, or the Ferndale area, or Whidbey Island, and we would venture up into the mountains at some point and do some hiking and whatnot. And he really loved the Pacific Northwest, as well as he loved Utah. The oceans, the mountains, the desert, and the Pacific Northwest really appealed to him. Plus, the Columbia and the Willamette rivers were big. Dad loved our national parks, and he took me to a few of them. Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier National Park, North Cascades National Park, and here in Utah, Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, Arches. Over the years, I kept noticing Dad's trait of, I called it dangling a boot. Getting to the edge and sticking a foot over. I told you he did this twice when we climbed up Mount St. Helens at the crater rim. And I finally yelled at him when we were up in the North Cascades. I said, Dad, you've got to stop doing that. It really bothers me, you know? You go right to the edge and you stick a leg over like you're dancing with the devil or something. Please stop doing that. One camping and hiking expedition up in the North Cades was really a special treat. We were on a trail that promised a spectacular view. The problem was, halfway through the hike, you had to go out on this ridge to get to that viewpoint. Well, the ridge was about as narrow as this podium, or maybe a little narrower, with steep drop-offs on both sides. Dad just hiked up that like it was a stroll in the park, whereas I had to get down on all fours and like crawl up to the top. When I got there, there was Dad sitting on the ledge, both feet dangling over. I got so mad at him. I said, get away from the edge and come back here where it's safe, please. Oh, well. You would think he would react to that, but instead, he just looked at me and he says, you looked like a snake crawling up that ridge on your belly. We laughed at each other, something fierce. After that little freak out, and we got back to the campground that night, it was late. We had worked really hard. It was a long, arduous hike, and we had to make dinner, and we were worried because it's late in the year. It's September, and it's going to get dark soon. And so we had to make dinner. We quietly made dinner and ate at a picnic table in the campground, Colonial Creek Campground in the North Cascades. Well, after dinner, I wasn't satiated, so I pulled out a great big bag of M&Ms and I threw it on the table, and we opened it up and started quietly gobbling handfuls of M&Ms. And it was dusk now, and we knew we had very little time. I didn't want to move, I was so tired, but we hadn't finished setting up our campground for sleeping. Dad had a VW Vanagon at the time, and I was in a tent, and I had to blow up an air mattress and set up the sleeping bag. He had to fix the interior of his van to get ready for bed. And it was quiet. We were tired. We had just eaten nearly a whole big bag of M&Ms. When Dad suddenly jumps on the picnic table with both fists raised in the air and yells, "I'm on candy!" As if he was high on all the sugar he had just ingested. Oh my God, we laughed so hard at each other. He jumped off of the picnic table and started scurrying around and got himself ready. It's just an amazing memory. One of many little stories I have about my dad, which there are too many, and I'm taking way too much time, so I'll move on. But after we were done with that little bit up in the North Cascades, it just became a matter of reflecting on all of that we have done together over the years. And I think that the main thing that I want everyone here to remember was that I really loved my dad. I know my brother did too. And it's so great to see all of you here too, because we can all share in that love together. And I appreciate that. And I want you all just to try to remember and never forget the great Pete Grundfossen. Thank you.
Hard act to follow, Doug. One sunny morning in the fall of 2004, I found myself at a large political campaign headquarters, standing with a dozen or so volunteers. We were focused on our team leader, who was clarifying our instructions for calling on residents in the nearby neighborhood. John Kerry was our candidate, and that team leader was Peter Grundfossen. The location, Tampa, Florida. What? Wait, I'd met him recently at a church's highway cleanup project. As we walked along picking up trash, he engaged me in conversation, and we discovered we'd both soon be in Florida at the same time. I had some free time and accepted an invitation to join him knocking on doors for a couple of days. But how, I wondered, had he traveled over 2,000 miles to a city and become the leader of one of Florida's most active Democratic headquarters? Thus began our friendship, which opened many new opportunities for me. Later that year, Peter collected a few guys at our coffee hour and suggested we start a church-focused dinner group. In time, we seven became fast friends, committed to each other, supporting our church and its mission, and keeping tabs on the action of the board and the pastors. These friends in this group led me to join activities, a book club, an early morning cycling breakfast club, thank you, Peter, an Emeriti hiking group, and a Utah football fan club. The Emeriti hiking group, I was an honorary member, by the way, that one introduced us to the wonders of Utah's wild lands and trail systems, happily adding state parks into the mix. I soon realized we'd found a larger group of friends here in Utah than we'd left in Sarasota after 3 decades. Today, the Dinner Guys group continues our monthly dinners with a revised membership and recently celebrated Peter's 20-year legacy. He called me one day to ask a favor. Would I drive his good friend, Fran Wilcox, who I knew from the church, to her Pilates sessions for a few weeks while he and Cathryn traveled? Pick her up Tuesdays at 10. She'll explain the routine, he said. When I picked her up after her session that day, she said she was a little tired and she wanted to forego her usual scenic drive up one of the canyons, but she did look forward to our lunch together and suggested the Citrus Grill down the street. I began to appreciate the extent of Peter's commitments to his friends and also joining people together, because Fran became a good friend too. Peter's vision, critical thinking, and problem solving revealed a unique intellect. He led a variety of groups, both at church and beyond, bringing a generous acceptance and a spirit of inclusiveness to them all. He had few requirements: commit to showing up, participating fully, and being kind. One gift noticed by the leaders of organizations he served was his ability to update and revise foundational documents. He seemed to enjoy the challenge. After months of engaging the interested parties, conducting interviews, and gaining perspective, and applying his editing skills as needed, his revised versions were invariably well received.
Among these projects, he rewrote the bylaws for this church and for his condo's homeowners association, two groups where consensus is never assured. Peter had an engaging conversational style. When he brought up a topic for discussion, he usually had a firm grasp of the subject. A man of many good habits, his reading every New Yorker magazine issue cover to cover was one I really admired. A soft-spoken gentleman, he was also an active listener. And Peter was very careful never to put down or one-up anyone. Slow to anger, he cursed rarely, finding more appropriate language to express even strong verbal responses. He made a few exceptions. When Utah lost to BYU on the last play of a football game, they'd led since the first quarter, he uttered a short, stunning string of profanity that would have made George Carlin proud. Peter could coin a phrase as well. When asked how his recovery from laparoscopic heart surgery was going, he replied, anybody, Peter, you remember? Minimally invasive, my ass. I miss Peter an awful lot, but I realized while compiling these stories that he will always be with me. We shared so many rides, dinners, and hikes like most of us have, and the football games. Peter enriched my life beyond belief. I hope these words ring true for the great number of his friends and family who are missing him as well, when you recall special times with him. A long friendship is a beautiful, complex thing, and I'm very grateful to have shared so many wonderful times with this amazing man.
Thank you all for joining us today to honor and celebrate Peter, who was the most remarkable man I ever met and the love of my life. I want to share just a bit, a flake of what I know about Peter and what made him so remarkable. Peter started off well. He had a joyous childhood, exploring the outdoors, the woods, the creeks of Washington and Oregon, and for 18 months on Adak, Alaska, where his father was serving as fire chief for the Corps of Engineers immediately after World War II. Because his father was a firefighter when Peter was young, and a calm and patient man, Peter got to experience what most boys can only experience in their imaginations: sliding down fire poles, hanging out with firefighters, and riding on fire trucks. He had a happy and adventurous childhood and generous and loving parents. It has always been my fast-held belief that the reason Peter was the loving and grounded man that he was is due to the fact that he was allowed to have a real childhood. A childhood where he felt safe, secure, loved, and guided. As a young man, Peter was active in D. Malay, and it's likely he began to develop his fine leadership skills and reverence for all sentient beings in that environment. For those of you who are not familiar with D. Malay, it's a youth leadership organization with Masonic origins. Peter's mother and father were active in the Masons. His father, Ivor, serving as master, and his mother, Leela, active in the Order of the Eastern Star and Amaranth for many years. Those values of reverence for all beings and civic responsibility were part of the tapestry of Peter's family life. Peter told a story about one night when he was young at the dinner table with his family, and Peter quoted a friend's father using the N-word. As Peter told the story, the room went completely quiet, and after a long silence and a meaningful glance between Leela and Ivor, Leela calmly said, "We don't use language like that in this house." It stuck with Peter that racism, even secondhand, was not acceptable. What sticks with me is the kind but very clear lesson Leela and Ivor imparted over that family meal. Leadership and lifelong friendships are the leitmotif of Peter's life. He served as student body president for what was then Portland State College, now PSU, for 2 years in the late 50s, where he earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees. He began his career as a high school teacher, first in Hillsboro, Oregon, and then at Centennial High in Gresham, Oregon, where he had grown up. While teaching at Hillsboro High, he made one of those lifelong friends, a student of his who corresponded with Peter throughout his life. Her name is Patty Welter, and Peter took so much pleasure in witnessing the life of the beautiful, generous, and loving woman she became. From teaching, Peter found his way into university student activities as Assistant Dean of Student First at PSU, where in 1964, he had a transformative experience participating in a training group, or T group as they were called, with the National Training Laboratories, which was headquartered in Bethel, Maine. Peter's first T group experience was held in Cedar City, Utah. And the trainer, Martin Erickson, or Eric as he was known, became Peter's mentor, colleague, and friend. Peter participated in several T groups throughout the 60s, and these group experiences helped shape much of the man we all got to know and love. Now, T groups were unstructured, the only agenda being the group would work together to determine what it is they wanted to accomplish and how to go about it. This was done with the underlying goal of gaining insight into themselves, their own behavior, and how their behavior was perceived by others, and how their behavior impacted the success of that group. As the trainer, Eric would not have guided the group to an agenda or even actively led the discussion. His interventions, minimal at best, would have been to pose questions and make observations aimed at guiding group members to that core goal of gaining personal insight. That Cedar City Tea Group in 1964 changed everything for Peter. It was in that first tea group that Peter experienced firsthand, in the here and now, day after day, for 2 solid weeks, the profound truth that listening is more important than talking. Experiential learning at its very best. Not only did that first tea group experience awaken Peter's consciousness to the power of human interaction and self-awareness, but he was also introduced to the red rock splendor of southern Utah. And he met Virginia Frobes, the woman who a year and a half later would recruit him to the University of Utah as her assistant dean of students. Thank you, Virginia. Peter remained in university student activities until 1972. During that period, he was elected to the Utah House of Representatives as a proud Democrat. He served 1 term, resigning to serve as director of Model Cities, a federally funded planning program that prohibited his continued service in Utah politics, the Hatch Act. He later served as director of the Commission on the Consolidation of Salt Lake City and County Governments. During work with that commission, he wrote a weekly column for the Salt Lake Tribune on the issues surrounding consolidation of city and county government. And it was while doing this community organizing work that Peter decided to go to law school. He recognized that having a law degree would boost his effectiveness in helping to shape sound government policy. He was 40. It was a big deal. He went from having a job, a paycheck, and significant career successes to being one struggling law student among many. Except most of those other struggling law students had brains that were 15 years younger, and they were fresh out of college. He often referred to this experience as one of the most humbling of his life. He was touring Norway and Sweden with his then 18-year-old son Douglas, the poor man's way, on their road bikes, sleeping in a wet tent along the way, when he learned he had passed the Utah bar. He told the story often and with a great deal of joy and relief. It was never Peter's intention to practice law, although he did give it a good go. He practiced for 4 years in the early 80s, and he left that law practice to serve as administrative law judge for the Utah Public Utilities Commission, a job he thoroughly enjoyed. In 1985, Peter's parents were in their mid-80s, and his father was in declining health, and Peter wanted to help out. I was 38 and had lived in Utah all my life. So being young and adventurous, we sold our house and moved to Portland. Now, I was completely naive about the emotional impact of leaving my family and friends and the open blue skies and landscapes of Utah. So It was not an entirely smooth transition. But for Peter, he was home. He hardly noticed the low gray skies and the 30-plus straight days of rain that is winter in Western Oregon. We were quite a few years in, 5, 7, something like that, when I tearfully admitted to him that I simply could not make Portland my permanent home. After months, maybe years of negotiation, ever generous and reasonable, Peter agreed he would return to Utah if I could just make it to his retirement at 65. That was a few years out yet, but it was a fair compromise. Peter was well beyond his late 50s, and he had a job he enjoyed, and he didn't want to start over again. That job was the executive director of the Association of Oregon Housing Authorities. And Peter was instrumental in writing and passage of legislation creating the Oregon Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which provides money for low-income Oregonians to this day. Peter did retire at 65 in the year 2000, and we moved back to Salt Lake City. Peter was a public servant all of his career, save those 4 years in private practice. He always believed that the role of government is to help people, and he dedicated all of his creative energy and leadership skills to that end. I met Peter on a fateful night in July of 1979 at a bar called D.B. Cooper's. We had remarkably similar histories. We'd both married young and had children young, too young. We both divorced less than a decade later, married again, having doubts, but pushing ahead anyway. Both of our second marriages ended way short of a decade. And we both knew early on in our relationship that we would spend the rest of our lives together. We spent over 45 years together. And he transformed my life. He transformed me. Peter was adventurous when it came to the outdoors. I had not been much of a camper, hiker, or even into fitness. Peter brought all those wonders into my life. Our first 4th of July together, about a year after we had met, Peter took me backpacking above Brighton. We made camp on a ridge that gave us a view beyond comprehension. I remember sitting in starlit darkness and absolute silence, watching far-off fireworks in every direction. The next morning, a bald eagle flew up over the ridge so close we felt and heard his wings move the air around us. Living in Oregon, we explored the Three Sisters Wilderness area and the many hundreds of lakes where in those days we could hike and camp for days without seeing other people. And it was in our years in Portland that Peter got us into kayaking. His constant refrain in those days, "Cathryn, there's all this water around us." At first, he thought he wanted to learn to sail, but then he found out how expensive even a small sailboat was to buy and maintain, so he began to explore canoes. Well, on our first canoe lesson, we learned how much cooperation is required, and that held little appeal for either one of us. Then one of those lifelong friends, a guy by the name of Chuck Ensign, whom Peter met at that Cedar City tea group, said, "Check out kayaks, man." So Peter started exploring kayaks. I gave him our first kayaking experience as a birthday gift in October. It was a guided overnight trip out of Orcas Island in the San Juan Islands in Washington State. We paddled from Orcas to Susha Island, spent the night camping, and paddled back late the next day. We were both hooked. Peter, for the sheer adventure of it. Nobody loved an adventure like Peter. And I, for the exquisite birding that kayaking provided. We had so many adventures in our kayaks. We explored the west coast of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, doing one group tour of Barkley Sound, or what's called the Broken Group, in very big ocean. Very big ocean. I remember being in a trough at one point and not seeing any other kayakers around me. We also did Clayoquot Island Preserve a couple of times. One time taking my two sons who were in their 20s at that time. And the Sea of Cortez, setting out from Loreto on Baja, where our young and beautiful guides would skinny dip after dark, their sleek bodies igniting the phosphorescence, lighting them up like mermaids conjured up by 6-year-old girls. Dazzling. We paddled Johnstone Strait twice. Now, Johnstone Strait is a portion of that very large body of water between Vancouver Island and the mainland of Canada. By this time, we had set out on our own, no guides. Those Johnstone Strait trips were full of wildlife and adventure. We watched a bald eagle pair teaching their two fledglings how to fish. And we listened as the ravens taught their complex language to their young. We had orcas swimming around and under our kayaks. We watched one day in absolute awe as Native American youth paddled by in traditional dugout canoes, stopping with their beautifully carved paddles held up in salute when the orcas would pass by. We learned that currents and tides, while related, are not the same, and neither will be denied. We did a 7-day expedition kayak of Glacier Bay, Alaska. We had to take a class with the Park Service on camping in wilderness and bear country. The night before we put out, we were on the beach in Gustavus practicing loading our rented kayak when we noticed a black bear sow and her 3 cubs. The sow had a huge halibut in her jaws, dragging it up the beach toward the forest. The cubs trotting behind like joyous toddlers. The next morning, we loaded our kayaking gear onto the Park Service catamaran, which carried us up the bay to one of several drop-off points. Now, there's just no way to describe the feeling of standing on a wilderness beach in grizzly country with one matchstick boat and gear scattered everywhere, watching that catamaran sail away. Peter and I talked about it often, that seductive blend of absolute vulnerability and exquisite anticipation. One night on that trip, we made camp not far from Reed Glacier, and it popped and cracked and calved all night long. At one point, after a big boom and splash, Peter said to me, "I think we may get swamped." We did not, but it was a very exciting night. Another night, we ate our dehydrated camping food, dinner, on a large outcropping overlooking the ice-choked bay, and the ravens arrived and danced for us well into the slanted light of evening. I believe they enjoyed our admiration, praise, and applause as much as we enjoyed their beauty and grace. It was not the first or the last time ravens danced for us. It is clear they have lived among humans since our very beginnings, and Peter and I often wondered aloud about their chatter. You think that phrase was Quack-Udle or Lakota, we would imagine. After we returned to Salt Lake City in 2000, we got back into Red Rock camping and hiking. When I retired in 2008, I wanted solitude. Now, solitude was not Peter's natural state. But ever generous, he moved with me to Torrey. That first winter, we rented a little farmhouse on the old dump road. But just 4 months in, we bought a cabin just up the road. Winter in Capitol Reef is cold and harsh, windy, and stunningly beautiful. Peter drove back to Salt Lake City almost weekly to attend church and get his social fix. We lived in Torrey off and on, mostly on for me, for 2 years, leaving only when Peter's health required more immediate and comprehensive care than we could get in Torrey. I wrote in Peter's obituary that he was an emotionally mature man with the playfulness of a 9-year-old boy, a magical potion. Throughout our lives, he honored my introverted nature. Many of you may have heard his brief but accurate response to why I did not attend church with him. Because there are people there. He also nurtured me through several depressive episodes. I want to share with you a love letter I wrote to Peter in mid-January of this year. It best demonstrates his magical combination of emotional maturity and playfulness. Now, for some of you, particularly our children and grandchildren, this letter may contain TMI, and I apologize if it makes anyone uncomfortable. Dear Peter, this is a love letter. I feel like I have been composing it for over 45 years, since that glorious and fateful night in July of 1979, when first I got a glimpse of you, of your strong, beautiful back, made to look even broader across the shoulders by the wide striped collared shirt you were wearing, and your dazzling smile. I remember as if it were 5 minutes ago, turning to my friend Anna and asking, "Who is that man with that beautiful smile?" She did not know, but Sheila did, and introduced us. And although Sheila was putting the moves on you throughout the night, and at one point I wondered if you were responding, it was me with whom you spent the night. And many nights after that. You told me the next morning that I was a woman who could rule you, or words to that effect. I wish I could remember the exact words, but I too was swept away, so the details drift and blur. I recognized your keen intellect and ironic and playful humor right away, but I don't remember exactly when I discovered your calm and generous spirit. It may have been the night not too long after we met when I came to your house while you were eating a salad and listening to the long play album of Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris. First, no man I had ever met or dated would have made himself a salad for dinner. The men I had known would have expected me to do that or heated a frozen burrito. So that was a delightful surprise. Also, no man I had known would be listening to a musical performed by some French-sounding guy. Another delightful surprise. But I was in a mood, had been in a mood for a few years, wherein I wanted to push the limits, pick fights over sexism, especially with men I might be interested in loving. And Jacques Brel's music, although completely new to me and wonderfully sophisticated to my uncultured ear, was sexist. So I commented on it. You listened and kept eating your salad. I ranted some more and you listened some more and kept eating your salad. I kept ranting, and at one point you looked at me and flashed that brilliant smile and said, "Well, he is French." I remember thinking, this could work. This man may very well be able to ride out your storms. And ride them out you did, with great patience, love, and often humor. Do you remember the New Yorker cartoon you cut out and taped to our refrigerator when we lived on Sherman Avenue? It was maybe 1983 or 84. It was of a wild-haired woman being introduced to a full auditorium. And our next speaker is a real piece of work, the caption read. I laughed out loud, knowing it was meant for me. It still makes me laugh. It was still early in our relationship, February of 1980, when you first wrote out one of my depressive episodes. I was working on my master's degree at the University of Utah. We had just spent a wonderful long weekend in southern Utah, you introducing me to Snow Canyon and Zion. I had lived in Utah all of my life, but you, a Northwesterner, are the one who introduced me to my state, to its diverse beauty. I remember being awed to the point of tears at how dramatic the landscape, the palette, the sky, the sacred rock. And I remember waking under the watchman in Zion the last day of our trip, a rainy and cold morning, and knowing I was sinking. Cohen says, I caught the darkness, and that's pretty much what it felt like. Just came on, like catching the flu, only in place of nauseous despair. In retrospect, I was in way over my head, not with you exactly, but with my life, as a student, a single mom, striving, broke, and now falling in love. rapture can take a toll. I did not get out of bed or dressed for weeks, most of March or April. I took incompletes in all of my coursework. I could not care for Daniel. You nurtured me through that. You were kind and understanding. You demanded nothing of me. You did not take it personally. You came over in the middle of the day and read Mike Royko and Doonesbury to me. You helped with Daniel. Your loving generosity, a major factor in my finally getting through it. Now, I know there are long times in our long love affair when we found ourselves, as Cohen puts it, on different sides of a line nobody drew. There were times we didn't know if we would make it, or worse, if we wanted to make it. And I don't mean to romanticize you because you are dying and I am grieving. Truth is that even when we got in trouble, you were generous. Being willing to do the hard work of couples therapy, driving us 2 hours each direction from Portland to Eugene to work with the best therapist in the state, doing the therapy homework with real commitment. And then, when it became clear I simply could not make Portland my permanent home, agreeing to move back to Utah, agreeing to leave your home and family so I could return to mine. Even now, while in the throes of pain and dementia, you listen to my poem. You say, "Read it again, Cathryn." You tell me it's really good, maybe the best I've ever written. You grasp my hand and cry. I do not know how I got so lucky. My relationship history up to July of 1979 would not have predicted it. But I am grateful for you, Peter. On my knees, grateful. Soaring with the ravens, grateful. Hallelujah, grateful. Love, C. When I read this letter to Peter in January, one of his last good days, his response was, "It was easy, Cathryn. It was easy." Peter wanted his ashes spread at a beautiful spot in Wayne County where the ravens dance and sing, where we, as we often agreed, they hold their powwows. So we will do that. As many of you know, Peter suffered greatly in the last 3 years of his life. The intense pain, loss of muscle control, profound confusion, hallucinations, and memory loss of Lewy body dementia are terrible, terrible to experience and to witness. Over the last 3 years, I have often turned to the poetry of Leonard Cohen for comfort, and I will close with his words. There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard, the holy or the broken hallelujah. Thank you.
wildflowers. You belong somewhere, you feel free. Run away, find you a lover. Go away, somewhere all bright and new. I have seen no other who compares with you. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in a boat out at sea. You belong with your love on your arm. You belong somewhere you feel free. Run away, go find a lover. Run away, let your heart be your guide. You deserve the deepest of cover. You belong in that home by and by. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong somewhere close to me, far away from your trouble and worry. You belong somewhere you feel free. You belong somewhere you feel free.
Friends, thank you so much for the gift of your presence. Thank you for giving that gift to our community and to this family. It has been an unusual joy to be at this memorial service and to learn more about Peter, who I already miss so much, and I know you do too. Let us close this service today with these words by Juanita DeLong. Do not come when I have died to sit beside a low green mound, or bring the first gay daffodils because I loved them so, for I shall not be there. You cannot find me there. I will look up at you from the eyes of little children. I will bend to meet you in the swaying boughs of bud-thrilled trees and caress you with the passionate sweep of storm-filled winds. I will give you strength in the upward trend of everlasting hills. I will cool your tired body in the flow of the limpid river. I will warm your work-glorified hands through the glow of the fire. I will soothe you into forgetfulness to the drop, drop of the rain on the roof. I will speak to you out of the rhymes of the masters. I will dance with you in the lilt of the violin and make your heart leap with the bursting cadence of the organ. I will flood your soul with the flaming radiance of the sunrise and bring you peace in the tender rose and gold of the after sunset All these things have made me happy. They are a part of me. I shall become a part of them. Our service is concluded. The family invites you to stay for a reception in our fellowship hall. Thanks for being here.